Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar. I'm Nicolette Pompa-Fansale, editor of ESI Africa, and your moderator for today's live webinar, exploring the possibilities of FinTech renewable energy market. Africa's enthusiastic embrace of transacting via mobile money, which has been witnessed with the advent of platforms such as M-Pesa, is indicative of a continent ripe for electronic investment and funding solutions. The renewable energy market is also primed with unique on- and off-grid solutions and is uniquely positioned for innovation in the form of FinTech, digital finance, e-payments, and even e-commerce. Through innovative platforms around financial markets and the renewable energy markets can support the growth of electrification, distributed energy, mini-grid development, and reduced carbon emissions, which is so important these days, along with grid-tied renewable projects. Already the market has seen a variety of FinTech solutions, diversifying access to finance, such as solar pay-as-you-go customer packages, crowdfunding solutions for renewable energy projects of varying sizes, and cryptocurrency ventures to stimulate the distributed energy resource market. So before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I would like to highlight that a recorded version of this webinar will be available for you to access on. And if you have any questions during the discussion, please type them into the Q&A box on the left-hand side of your screen. And each of these questions will be considered for a live response from our guest speaker. So those of you just joining us, welcome from wherever you are in the world today. Our guest speaker is Abe Cambridge, a solar entrepreneur. He is the founder and CEO of Exchange, a platform where anyone can buy and lease solar assets to commercial energy projects, and earn Bitcoin rental payments. So over the next 40 minutes or so, Abe will take you on a journey to understanding the opportunities that lay ahead for FinTech in the renewable energy landscape. Abe, you describe yourself as, or you describe your solution as a streaming, monetized African sunshine around the world. But my first question is, whether Africa is ready for FinTech disruption?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining in on this what's hopefully going to be informative and interesting presentation. And yes, I mean, Africa is not just ready for FinTech disruption; it's already being disrupted by FinTech. I mean, there's a requirement for it. It's financially underserved generally as a continent. And we've built and developed technology, not just in Europe, but in Africa itself, has developed and built tools which allows us to leapfrog traditional systems and go straight to peer-to-peer transacting. And this is, as you've already mentioned, it's apparent in mobile money, but now it's happening in the world of energy as well. And our platform merges the two things together.
All right. So the market can't continue with its business as usual model, and the public mindset and buy-in is definitely there. So this brings us then to the question of what brought you to the realization that FinTech could be a major disruptor to the power and energy sector?
It all came about through the world of blockchain and solar energy combined. I mean, for those not familiar with what blockchain technology is, it started with cryptocurrency, which is peer-to-peer money. It's decentralized form of money that anybody can access. All you need is an internet connection. And I drew the parallel with that in solar energy, being that with solar power, anybody can go solar. It takes a matter of weeks to go solar. You don't need to wait for grid infrastructure to be constructed. It's just a matter of connecting yourself to those solar panels. Solar panels still cost money, however, but there are people all around the world that want to own solar panels. But the world of cryptocurrency and blockchain, we now have one single financial layer through which the whole world can transact, which means that people can own solar energy panels in Africa and earn income from them the roof of your own home. And that's what I mean by seeming monetize African sunshine. And we see there's one sun, there's one earth. We shouldn't really be constrained about where we should put our solar panels. If they're going to work best in South Africa or East or West Africa, let's put solar panels there because that's where they work best.
Mm-hmm. So you talk a lot about solar power and solar PV, but is FinTech suitable to support any other renewable energy technologies, for instance, waste, biomass, even mini hydro projects?
Well, the thing about solar power is it can work on any scale. So you can work from a pico scale, a single solar cell and a solar lantern, all the way up to a utility scale solar plant. It's completely scalable, it's completely fractal. When you're talking about larger thermal power stations, there's still a need and requirement for much greater sources of capital through traditional financing mechanisms. So the advantages of FinTech aren't really suited to traditional thermal generation and are more suited to the decentralized and distributed energy systems of that solar power delivers. And even on a level of wind, I mean, wind turbines still operate better than scale the wind turbine, and they're still a bit fussy about replacing them. Whilst put a solar panel on any roof in Africa, and you're guaranteed to earn more income from it than you would do if you put it on a roof in the UK, for example.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of the gaps that we have in the market, where do you see the gaps being filled by FinTech?
Well, I mean, the gaps in the solar industry are obvious. I mean, anybody working in the solar industry, particularly the commercial industrial scale sector, will know that, I mean, traditionally in Europe, say traditionally, the solar industry is only 10 years old. But back in the olden days in Germany, it required subsidies and government policy to really drive investment into solar. Those don't exist in Africa, but they need not to either, because solar panels perform on their own merits when you've got a decent amount of sunlight. But it still requires capital. Businesses and communities, schools, they still are using up. They would still have to use their work capital in order to install the solar power plant. And solar power plants are quite particular in that they're very capital intensive up front with no running costs. The actual financial yield from them aren't really that attractive compared to, I don't know, if you manufacture cars, you're better off expanding your car factory than putting in solar panels so you can get a higher return from it. So, I mean, you have to look for a very specific type of funding, specific type of finance, and that's not available in less developed markets. And that's the gap that we were looking to fill.
But in terms of the unbanked people that are across the African continent, is FinTech something that would then bring them on board in terms of having entrepreneurship and growing their businesses and growing their communities?
Oh, totally. I mean, I just gave the example of the sort of commercial industrial side, but yes, on the rural electrification side, it's even more important that FinTech fills this gap, and indeed is. I mean, mobile money is incredible because people needn't now go to a bank branch to be able to transact between themselves electronically. All you need is a mobile phone. So that, I don't consider people who use M-Pesa unbanked. They do have a bank account. They have a mobile phone device. It's just a different type of bank. And these people, they're unbankable in a traditional sense in that they don't have credit histories. They may not have a permanent address. But we know as humans that everyone requires energy. People need energy to do work, to learn, to communicate. And so individuals around the world are willing to democratically choose to get solar projects funded for communities, where traditionally it required World Bank funding, which was fairly bureaucratic, burdensome, a little bit inefficient to get money down to projects, which have to happen at large scale to make it worth their while. With democratic peer-to-peer forms of funding, you can get small projects off the ground very efficiently and very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of getting projects off the ground and being an entrepreneur yourself, you have gone through the motions and the pros and cons of actually starting something around a FinTech solution. So what advice do you have for anybody that wants to start? Where do they go?
Developing their own FinTech solution, or could you just clarify a little bit? Sorry, say again? Where does a startup go? Well, okay, I see what you mean. Sorry, I get the question. So, yeah, I mean, if you're a startup working in the rural electrification space, I mean, traditionally you may have your first be a project developer, maybe a solar installation company looking to get a big gig. Traditionally, there's not been funding available because if a project is less than $1 million, it's unlikely you're going to get institutional funding, and banks would charge particularly high interest rates, especially if the project is high risk. So to date, the only option for these kind of businesses to go to traditional crowdfunding platforms. There's a company called Sun Funder that's doing amazing work in East Africa, which gives working capital loans to businesses, and that's great. And there are platforms like in South Africa we have Fund to Fund, which people can raise donation-based funding to get projects off the ground. But that can only get you so far because you can't rely on constant donations to support a business model, and indeed business models shouldn't require bail-ins or donations if it is a real sustainable business. And so that has left this gap for this portal, this need for reliable sources of capital injections into what should be good business models.
Right. And in terms of the peer-to-peer insurance fund, can you give us a little bit more information around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're already hosting and operating solar power plants in Africa, and we will soon be doing so in East and West Africa as well. And our solar projects are insured for fire, theft and damage, which means that the solar panels within those projects, which are owned by our membership, are protected against fire, theft and damage. But there is still it's the biggest mitigating, so the biggest risk is a consumer lease default. What if the end consumer of a solar project stops paying their bill? And that does present a risk. So we've built an insurance fund built around our own cryptocurrency called SunX. Now, SunX is our rewards currency that people earn when they use our platform, but it's also a cryptocurrency, which means it's interchangeable with all other cryptocurrencies around the world. What this means is it's a monetary token, which people can stake to our project insurance fund. And whilst it's staked there, they're self-insuring their own solar projects. And each solar project is only small compared to the whole pool of solar plants operating. The actual exposure or risk of replacing or moving a solar power plant is actually quite minimal. It still covers that gap. And people will earn more SunX tokens by staking their token into that fund. So there's actually there's a double positive for people for doing this. Because it's on blockchain, it's all automated. There's a smart contract that governs the issuance of SunX to a project and the event to be or to the people staking the token. And these are massive efficiencies which have never been possible before blockchain. Mm-hmm. And indeed filling this gap for an insurance product where previously there wasn't.
Right. So it's definitely transforming the whole market, whether it be for finance or insurance, or how you're going to get a project into a rural community under development. It's
filling in the gaps. I mean, it's getting harder and harder for traditional financial institutions to get involved with smaller, riskier projects. In fact, they're moving the other direction. They have to be looking for the lowest risk and largest projects to deploy capital into, which is fine, but it does leave these big holes for the middle of the solar sector, and in fact, most energy electrification projects left exposed, and a need for platforms such as Sun Exchange.
Mm-hmm. But with this, the trend of cryptocurrency, do you think that the traditional financiers will eventually get involved in these smaller projects?
Well, maybe en masse. So you need to have a significant number of them in one go for them to entertain. I mean, they need millions of dollars worth of project before it really makes them worth their while. I mean, the point in this kind of peer-to-peer part of the industry, this case-by-case basis, is that as a project comes along, we can execute it one by one. And I think there's room for. This is where the innovation comes in. It's not about replacing what exists. It's about what exists is left a gap, and it's being filled by new products and services.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to remind the audience you can post your questions into the Q&A box at any point, and we will put the question to Abe to answer. And I do have a very interesting question that has come up now. which is asking if you could indicate what the barriers to setting up blockchain technology, not regarding a specific application, but just to start setting it up and using it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the easiest way of utilizing blockchain technology is to set up a cryptocurrency account on a Bitcoin exchange. So if you're in South Africa, I'd point you to Luno.com, or there are others, but Luno has the most liquidity. And that'd be an easy way just to start getting cryptocurrency. And with it, you can purchase products from it around the world. You can use it to remit money or send money to yourself. So it's an easy way of getting into it. And I guess these exchanges are going to become more and more popular because the money, or at least transferring value, if you're a worker from where you're working to your home country, is much quicker and faster than using a cryptocurrency payment rail than it is through an alternative. So that would be one way. And obviously just using, I just pointed to Sun Exchange. I mean, you can easily if you use Sun Exchange, you're using blockchain technology. So that would be one way of doing it. Obviously, you can get into cryptocurrency mining, but that's a whole different world. And people can contact me separately about that if they wish to hear about it.
Mm-hmm. So that then brings me to the question about regulation and how are models and platforms such as crowdfunding and cryptocurrency regulated? Yeah.
So I mean, crowdfunding is quite a broad term, and there are regulations that apply to crowdfunding platforms, which is why we had to really think outside the box when we were developing Sun Exchange. So that is a micro leasing platform. People lease solar cells through our platform. But even though the micro leasing, it's such a new thing, it's not been possible before, that it's very hard to apply existing regulations to these new technologies. It's like trying to apply regulations around physical mail delivery services to email. The two things can't really be compared. So when you're trying to regulate cryptocurrency, I mean, this is something that still is not resolved. I mean, cryptocurrency has been around since 2009. And governments worldwide are struggling to find, is it an asset? Is it a currency? What does it mean? Should people declare it as income? It is a bit of a minefield because there are no clear answers. There's only 4 or 5 jurisdictions on the planet that have actually made it very clear what their positions are on blockchain and cryptocurrency. And South Africa necessarily isn't one of them. They have said how they're going to treat it on a tax basis, but actually around it, it's still fairly ill-defined. And I think that's because it's such new technology and it's doing such incredible things that people still waiting for this kind of the dust to settle to see what it's actually doing. And that's why use cases such as Sun Exchange is so important, because we're demonstrating actually what is possible, what can now be done. Now we've got these systems, what can happen, and the amount of direct investment that can come into emerging markets because we've now got a really secure, transparent payment and financial network people can trade peer-to-peer with. Now that's incredible. So we're bringing direct investment into clean energy systems and solar powering countries that need affordable access to clean energy, and that's happening. So that's a great demonstration of what can happen, and therefore a reason why it should not be stopped, but at least observed until we work out what aspects of this do need regulation.
Mm-hmm. Because it's so new, we don't really have any cases that we can look at to say these are the possible minefield dilemmas that we should look out for.
Well, I think when it comes to sort of remittance properties of cryptocurrency, obviously there needs to be exchange controls, and so Luno, the cryptocurrency exchanges, are dealing directly with the financial reports, the reporting structures. So that is taking place. And that's probably where it's going to be. I mean, think about it, the cryptocurrency exchanges are kind of becoming the new banks. Not really, because they're really just holding digital assets, and it's not actually money. And this is where it becomes ill-defined, because Bitcoin doesn't exist in the exchange, it exists on the blockchain, which are different things. So this is why it's really hard for regulators to get their heads around, anyone in fact, on what's actually going on here. But it's happening.
I think the biggest point that it is very much based on, as you put in one of our conversations, on trust, on truth.
Yes, I mean that's it. I mean the fact is with a blockchain, you've got a suitable record of what has happened, And that's amazing. That's never before happened in human history. We had a publicly accessible record of truth that no one really has to pay to uphold, that the miners of the blockchain are actually keeping this. And anyone can now use it. And that's fantastic. I mean, what an advancement.
It is. I have another audience question, which is and the question is referring to self-insurance by SunX, and could it be conceived that low-income households grouping together would be able to establish a peer-to-peer self-insurance service?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it totally is possible.
And the question goes on to look at perhaps similar to how a stokvel works, facilitated by smart contracts. Do you see something like that working?
I do, but it would have to also consider what's the event that's taking place in order to trigger an insurance claim. And the thing with our insurance product is because it's all governed by a smart contract, and there's no point in having a blockchain application unless there's a smart contract behind it. With an application such as this, rather, and that's because you need to have an event happens that can be the oracle of truth. So in our instances, payments stopping to come into the smart contract for a period of X months will constitute what we'll define as a default, and that will trigger that event. So if there's a stokvel insurance product, I mean, you'll have to work out what's the event that happens that triggers that insurance. So if it's, for example, a community funeral insurance fund, the smart contract will have to understand when, say, a death certificate has been registered, and it would need to know where has that been registered and is it electronic. If it's not electronic, it's probably going to be a fairly complex thing to prove.
Okay.
But it is possible.
Right. I think that the key answer here is that nothing is impossible. It's really a sphere where anything can.
It's exactly right. It's basically a new. We're based about 1995 when the internet first came out. It's like you've got this whole new world of possibilities and things that can happen, but all around sort of things that would otherwise have to be done by third parties. It's all about financial systems here and transference and monitoring and recording, and in such a way that it's not open to hacking. You can't hack the Bitcoin blockchain. It's impossible.
Right. So this thing brings us to the question around the importance of strong partners in the FinTech space. Yeah. I mean the fact is that there's not many people operating in this space, and there's a lot of people exploring it. But it's extremely important that organisations start exploring these things because it's happening. And looking at maybe partnering in terms of the telecom sector with another sector.
Yeah, I mean, so the telecoms is a really interesting one, and it's something that we're trying to get strong partnerships in place with, because it's the one gap that is left is if people are using phone connection, you need connectivity. And the kind of projects that we're really trying to get off the ground is rural electrification combined with data connection. And you can really close the loop there by putting in cryptocurrency mining hardware into villages. So people have not only got their own internet connection, they've got their own energy supply and their own monetary supply within a village. Now that's really what could be a really breakthrough model. And we're so welcome to work with telecoms who are looking to pilot ideas like that with us. So, I mean, the telecoms are a really key part of this.
Right. Oh, and in terms of strong partnerships and based again on the principle of trust, what and how would a partnership transpire?
So, I mean, there's the Rocky Mountain Institute in Denver, Colorado, United States, set up something called the Energy Web Foundation. And they're trying to standardize and formalize monitoring systems, which then go on to solar energy plants specifically. So there's like a standard on how do you record when electricity has been produced. So we're working with them as on their originator program. So we're going to be putting these an agreed standard for smart meters on solar plants, which then record onto the blockchain. Obviously, we're actually using 3 blockchains. We're using the Solarcoin blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain. So it gets confusing. Energy Web Foundation are doing, is making sure that the industry is together to coordinate and make sure that we've actually got agreements in place.
So very complex systems can be sort of invented in the tech space.
Yes, exactly. This requires people actually knowing what other people are doing. Like, we shouldn't be working in silos. Obviously, this is it's like an open source thing we're all working on. And you're working with blockchain, it's working together with the global community. So it's important that some organizations are at least keeping people knowing what each other are thinking.
Right. We have another audience question which I'd like to pose to you, and this is looking at would a peer-to-peer electricity market in mini-grids be more likely to happen than a whole grid-connected market, and why?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Would a peer-to-peer electricity market in mini-grids be more likely to happen than a whole grid-connected market?
I think so, especially with rural electrification. I mean, the thing with peer-to-peer is that it doesn't really work on an existing centralized grid model, because you can't trade energy on someone else's cables. It's probably going to be inefficient, and it's probably going to be illegal. They're not your cables, and because you're having to pay wheeling charges, it's probably going to be too expensive. But when you're setting up private networks and you've got communities living close to each other, sure, people, if the hardware is owned by that community, they should be able to trade energy amongst themselves peer-to-peer. And there are energy platforms that exist that have been built around those principles. There's Power Ledger, there's various other ones starting in Europe, and they're doing some great work, and they do peer-to-peer trading. But obviously we're not necessarily so interested in the trading of the energy. We're interested in producing energy in the first place. I mean, if you're trading energy, you're kind of implying that there's a surplus of energy there, which is great, but that's kind of like a first world problem, isn't it? You've got too much of something. What do you do with it? You sell it to your neighbour. But so we're more focused on actually solving the initial problem. Is let's get energy infrastructure to be built in the first place.
Right. This is also poses the question of where the traditional utility sees itself in the next 2 decades. Anything could happen.
You just need to look what's going on in Germany. I mean, that's you can look at what's going to happen to utilities there. I mean, they have to work much more in a service-orientated industry. Obviously, grid management is always going to be a significant. You're always going to need a grid. Grids are important because they connect communities together with them. So there is always be a need for that. And I should imagine that by utilities adopting blockchain technologies, there'll be huge efficiencies enabled and unlocked, because you don't need to keep your own records. You don't need to keep your own servers, and data collection and proving data becomes a lot easier and a lot lower cost. So I should imagine that utilities will start embracing blockchain models to the point where the end consumer customers won't even know that the utilities are utilizing blockchain technology. They just ultimately will do.
Right. I think that perfectly answered a question from one of our listeners, which was around what's the future for owned distribution companies in a peer electricity market. Yeah. I
mean, the other point is that sort of state-owned utilities, I mean, often would use centralized thermal power stations. Thermal power stations they're very cheap to build, and they're costly to operate. We don't need those anymore. The technology that's now available with storage systems and the rate of cost coming down on storage systems with solar, I mean, that's the future. If there's going to be significant investment going into large thermal power stations, you can do the maths and work out how much solar and storage you can construct at a time, and then take into account the carbon emissions and the speed, and you're probably going to come up with a positive result in favour of solar.
Right. So that looks at basically the traditional markets that can utilize cryptocurrencies in various ways and not just to fund projects.
Sorry, say that again?
Yeah, so Abe, I was saying that looks at how the traditional utility can utilize cryptocurrency in various ways, which brings me to the question of, are traditional financiers embracing this new financial age, or are they pushing back?
I don't think they don't really know how to react at the moment because it is unregulated, and I mean banks are exploring cryptocurrency and blockchain. But because cryptocurrencies aren't regulated, it's almost like they can't actually deal with them because they are heavily regulated. They're regulated organisations, so they can't use them even if they wanted to. And the second is that it's massively disruptive. I mean, the role of a bank is to play this third party between two people paying and receiving, and blockchain eliminates that. So, I mean, just like solar energy is disrupting and kind of making utilities rethink their existence, the cryptocurrency is doing the same thing with mainstream banks. And there are people exploring private blockchains, but that kind of misses the point because blockchain should be public, it should be open, should be available to everybody. Otherwise, it's just another private database. So these are massively disruptive things that are happening, but they're happening in parallel. And let's not forget that solar energy and cryptocurrency both emerged around the same time. 2008, 2009, both of these things emerged on the world scene, which I think is incredible. And it's just looking how far they've come in this period of time. The industry has built 300 gigawatts of power over the past 10 years, which is the equivalent of 300 nuclear power stations. I mean, you couldn't build a nuclear power station in that time, and we built 300 gigawatts of solar. So it's completely unprecedented in its exponential growth.
Right. So they can work definitely side by side at the moment.
They're complementary technologies. I mean, if you're distributing a decentralized energy systems, it makes sense to do that with distributed decentralized monetary systems. You know, they're two complementary. They work together.
Right. So later in the month, on the 15th and 17th of May, you will be speaking at the African Utility Week conference at the CTITC in Cape Town. And the subject that you are going to be broaching is the blockchain and smart metering. And so my question is about how these two terms are connected.
Yeah, so as I've mentioned previously, with the blockchain, you need truth, you need an event happening, so you need to prove something has happened, and it can't be disputed. That's why blockchains are a trustless network. You don't need a trusted third party to verify something. You just need to agree as a consensus what is the event that happens that you're agreeing on. And with energy production, it's the metering. So everyone needs to agree that a certain standard or a certain meter is the one that's used to tell you what has happened. And we'll be demonstrating or giving examples of how we're working with the Energy Web Foundation to do this. So you'll give a live demo of how we're running a chain program that's reading solar energy from one of our solar plants. There's one in Stellenbosch, and how that is depositing cryptocurrency in real time into cryptocurrency wallets for our customers.
Mm. So is the term smart metering really applicable here?
Yeah, I mean it's smart. It's smart. The smart prefix can be bandied around a bit too much, in my opinion. But I mean, it's a meter that's connected to the internet. It's web enabled. It's Internet of Things, and it can give us more than just usage. It can give us data on energy demand. It can also record directly onto the blockchain.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk a bit about why crowdfunding, why crowdinvesting is proving to be a successful model in the African energy space. Is this affordability and accessibility? You've had quite a few projects on go at the moment, so you can give us, say, maybe a short case study into one of your projects.
Yeah, so just for example, our project over in Durban, it's for the rehabilitation of wildlife. You know, they're a not-for-profit. They've been operating 20 years. They do amazing work rehabilitating wildlife and releasing them back into the wild with animals that have been hurt by human activities. But they rely on donations, on funding, but they're still having very expensive energy bills. This project was 17 kilowatts. It's not a huge project. If they were going to go to the bank and borrow money, they'd probably charge 15, 16%, maybe even higher. And if that project is probably still too big to go and get donation-based crowdfunding. So it required a completely different approach. So we hosted their project on Sun Exchange and invited our members to solar panels for their project and lease them to them, and our platform enabled that, and we had the solar panels within 1 month. And that's the kind of thing that really is important, because people want these things to happen. Individuals all around the world want to see and Africa rise in a way that's sustainable and a way that doesn't harm the environment. I mean, Africa's potential is huge. The population is going to increase to 3 billion by the end of this century. But if Africa doesn't go solar and doesn't start utilizing sustainable development techniques, then the whole planet is in trouble. And I think that people around the world recognise that, and that's why these kind of crowd mechanisms are important, because it allows the world to work together, working side by side to make good things happen.
Okay. So this is an ongoing project, I take it. And in terms of what's been happening since the project has connected to providing electricity, what has happened on the project?
Sorry, what has happened on the projects?
Yeah. Have there been any challenges that you didn't foresee?
Not really. I mean, just the normal practical matters of getting solar projects installed. Obviously, one of our recent projects at Noisner Elephant Park, we had an installation delay because Christmas got in the way. Some of the installers left before it was completed, so it caused those kind of challenges. But those that we still got the system operating within 2-3 months of financial close, which is still considered. I mean, if you're doing in deserts, you've got big to contend with. So that's why the distributed energy deployment is much faster, because you're working in a built environment. So you're not having to contend with applying for PPA permits with ESCOM, where there's huge delays when the IRPP program gets postponed, not postponed, but just rounds get delayed. We don't need to contend with that, because we're dealing peer-to-peer with it's business to business. Okay. So it's faster. You can work faster, and that's what we've noticed.
Yeah. So the people that buy into the crowdfunding, can you give us a bit of a profile around them? Are they a certain type of entrepreneur that gets involved? Is it individuals? And whereabout in the world are they based?
Well, I mean, it's the people using platforms as Kiva, which is they give interest loans to the emerging markets. That's one of they're a very huge organisation, but they're very America-focused. In terms of sort of local platforms like Thunderfund, it's very much focused on South African population. And I guess it depends on what the kind of project is, depending on the crowdfunding campaign, and people from all walks of life. Again, it depends on the nature of the project. From a Sun Exchange point of view, we've got members located in 70 countries around the world now, and because we're kind of cryptocurrency based, we do attract people that already use cryptocurrency, so the first movers in technology. We also act as a bit of a gateway into crypto, because it's a first use case of the technology. People use us to sort of start getting into the world of cryptocurrency. So that's one thing we've noticed, is that we have people who kind of not first movers, but wanting to first kind of thing. And then we also have people who do want to help with a particular project if it's something which the objective of that project suits them. So if they're, for example, fans of wildlife and animal conservation, they were back what will at least deploy their solar panels into one of our wildlife projects.
Right. So marketing of it is very important as well. So do you have any advice to somebody that wants to start their own project, how they would go about marketing it?
It's a relentless slog. You've got to be absolutely shameless and just hustle. Don't be afraid to sit there on Facebook every single day, messaging every one of your friends until you get something from them. That'd be advice. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid. Just hustle. And that's what a crowdfunding. When I started Sun Exchange on a crowdfunding platform on Indiegogo, I probably lost a few friends along the way. I had to contact some people that I hadn't spoken to in too long. But you just got to do it. I mean, that's the nature of it, and that's what's so brilliant about these platforms, that an individual can turn an idea into reality, and then have these platforms and portals to achieve that, where previously it wasn't possible.
So when somebody is interested in investing in your project, what are the types of questions, or what is the most usual question that comes out?
People often ask us the lease rental that we're estimating, like how did that come about? How do we forecast that? And because these are actually, we call them lease contracts, but they're actually like nano PPAs. I mean, people are buying a solar cell and they're charging us by the kilowatt hour produced from their solar cells. So it's nano PPAs really, not leasing, but it's the amount of energy generated. So people often ask us a question about how did we come about these. And so we're applying standard industry assessment methodology. So what's the solar cell degradation? What's the assumed rate of inflation? And how much energy is actually going to consume at the user's end? And so we get on that, like actually our methodology and approach. We do have a lot of comprehensive documentation on our for each project, which people can consult, and people then come to us if they don't have any questions. We also have a live Telegram channel that's manned 24 hours a day with some of our team always on there, which people can just drop in and join and ask our team questions and speak to the rest of the Sun Exchange community. And there's a link to that Telegram channel on our website.
So it's basically being very open with the information that people will be seeking once a project is up for bidding.
Correct. I'd also just point out that if people are looking on projects, it's worth exploring the world of initial coin offerings and ICOs. It is a way of attracting attention to a really kind of far out idea and get global recognition and support by doing this. I mean, Sun Exchange, we're issuing our own cryptocurrency at the moment called SunX for a token cell, which again you can check out on our website. But this is a radical way of attracting attention to a project. And if we went to a said, please invest in us because we want to start an insurance fund for emerging markets for consumer default on solar projects, it would take us a very, very, very long time to convince a traditional funder to back that. But with ICOs, you've got a global community of people that just want to see cool things happen and have got very vast sums of money to support it. So I do recommend people looking into the tokenization models if they're looking to get business ideas off the ground.
Right. And this is definitely the space where innovation is happening, and you will definitely see some beautiful things happening in the market. Abe, I just want to pose some questions to you from the audience. And the first question is, what are the risks of crowdfunding within the African context based on the dire need by rural or low-income communities?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends. I mean, the risk of crowdfunding, again, crowdfunding is a very broad term, so it's hard to answer. I mean, if you're talking about the ability to pay of communities, then don't. We're not crowdfunding from communities. We're not demanding payments off rural communities. We're getting solar energy systems into rural communities that are currently paying way more for diesel and kerosene than they will pay for the equivalent light and energy from solar. So anyway, that's why we're banking on the sun to actually reduce the costs for rural communities, not extracting income from them. We're actually making their life better. And if you are doing a crowdfunding campaign in rural communities, then you may have a challenge to collect payments from people because they may not have internet connection.
That is where perhaps the Stockfell type of community investment could happen.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and they are, and there are models like that. They're not necessarily blockchain orientated, but as I've mentioned previously.
Right, so the next question is on investment in a renewable energy mini grid. It's always fraught with uncertainty of investments when the main grid arrives, the area of operation of a mini grid. How can this genuinely be allayed?
I love that question. Thank you. I'm going to check who asked that question. Kiburu from the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Thank you for asking that question because it's an area which is extremely interesting and one that we do have a solution for. The mining hardware for running blockchains does require a significant amount of energy. Now, there are now what are called mobile mining that can be deployed into mini grids to baseload, and that baseload energy then consumed with rural microgrids. Now, there are other things that can apply as baseloads. I mean, if you've got any small businesses and mini grids, for sure, to power those as your anchor tenants and value-added service like ice production and refrigeration. But if you're looking for a really solid, reliable energy consumer, then you can basically sell energy to cryptocurrency miners, because you've got this supply of solar power. And as the mini grid starts consuming more energy, so as households start getting technologies and buying electrical items and household goods that actually require energy, then you can just divert the power to the mini grid. So there are solutions around this, and obviously by having cryptocurrency mining hardware in the village, you then have this kind of source, this supply of digital tokens which the village can use. And these are really far out there ideas, but if you would like to contact me, I'd love to work with you and see if we can get a pilot up and running.
That's brilliant. Yes, I think that prior to the whole crowdfunding, crowdinvesting era, I don't think this was possible.
No, I mean, it's just the idea of transacting in such low amounts internationally was not possible previously. It's just too impractical to send small amounts of money around the world, and that's because it's lots of small amounts that add up and get things to happen that otherwise wouldn't happen.
Yeah. So our next question from the audience is around blockchain inherent security relies on the number of machines on its network, among others. What do you do to increase this number?
Increase the number of machines. Okay, so I mean, it's quite technical, and I'm not really sure this is the really right forum for this discussion. I mean, the proof, there is a number of ways of running a blockchain, and they can be more or less centralized. So, I mean, the move would be to move into a blockchain consensus mechanism which is the most decentralized. So, in that respect, you need a low blockchain size, because if you have a very large block size, you need to have more powerful computers to be able to run the block. So, just comparing the Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash blockchains, for example, Bitcoin Cash with much more powerful computers because they've got a larger blockchain size. So almost automatically more centralizes the mining of it. Whilst Bitcoin has got a 1 megabyte block size, you don't need such a powerful computer to do the mining and running a node. So that would be one way. But again, it's not necessarily related to FinTech. It's more about the underlying blockchain technology.
Right, and there are specialists that actually deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can, if you want to. There are people who are working on this on a day-to-day basis all around the world. It's what they do, live and breathe, is working out on how to improve the security of blockchains.
So our next audience question is, what are the legal remedies in favor of an aggrieved crowdfunder who is not satisfied with how the scheme is operated? Are there cases of crowdfunding that have been settled in such a situation?
I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, each country has their own crowdfunding regulations, and obviously, if you're doing investment, then there has to be done according to a certain set of standards. And it's just about how it's sold and having open and honest documentation. And yeah, I mean, you really just have to look at the regulations on crowdfunding in that country. But it's something that should be at least flourish. I mean, peer-to-peer. It's cramming such a broad term, so it's really hard for me to answer. There's so many different ways of doing it, but it's something that they are allowing great stuff to happen. It's encouraging innovation, it's encouraging investment, it's encouraging small businesses to get up and running. So these are things that really should be embraced rather than ignored or tried to be curtailed.
Right. And because everything is very open and information is so freely available, there shouldn't be any cases where somebody is unhappy with the result.
That's exactly right. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So with the blockchain systems, because everything is so open and public, people know what they're getting into, and they can check that things are actually happening. And it's all about self-responsibility. I mean, that's really one of the core values of blockchain. It's about self-responsibility. Like I'm going to be responsible for my own actions. That's really what it comes down to. So if you own a Bitcoin wallet and you own your private key for that, you're not relying on anybody else to look after your Bitcoin. If you lose your private key, you've lost it. That's your fault. So it's about that. So I guess it's about selling, and there are some cloud mining Bitcoin scams operating, and those are dodgy. But if you need to be at least aware that there are those kind of things happening. But at the end of the day, it's all about self-responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So we are almost coming to the end of our webinar. So I'm only going to take 2 more questions for Abe to answer. And the first one is, why and how can we take part in the Sun Exchange token sale?
Well, the token sale is currently open. We have a pre-sale that's live on our website. So if you go to the sunexchange.com/token, you can register. You can, if you use your Bitcoin or Ethereum, you can acquire tokens. And if you've got a credit card, you can acquire tokens. And we're giving away a 15% bonus of tokens until the 21st of May. And the tokens are the equivalent of $1 each. And once the SunX token is live on our platform, you have to spend $10 for one. So you can see this is a really easy way of getting SunX tokens upfront quickly and easily, and then giving you maximum discounts and bonuses when using Sun Exchange platform by holding and accumulating SunX.
Mm-hmm. And I think the why of that question would be for each project is if you feel passionate about that project, that would be the why.
Yeah, I mean, if you're holding SunX, you get discounts when buying solar panels for one of our projects. I mean, but we're a marketplace. You will things like take a lot, but we're selling solar panels and allow those items to be leased onto a project. So if you hold SunX, you're going to be better off doing that with SunX tokens, and then you can then stake your tokens into an insurance fund and insure your product.
So the last audience question that I have is, in a peer-to-peer project, what kind of awareness actions do you take to engage the local population, as some might find it too complicated?
Yeah, well, so when it comes to it, we obviously have to be able to bringing in energy to populations that haven't yet had access to electricity. There's definitely a degree of education that's required, because people haven't yet ever turned on electric element and realised how much electricity it produces. So we do always have a community engagement program leading up to our projects in rural areas. It's absolutely essential, and we're not necessarily going to perplex them with the intricacies of how blockchain mechanisms work. It's about keeping things very simple. But at the end of the day, people have warmed to mobile money and text message-based currency transfer. So obviously, it's not rocket science. But I guess it's just about the energy behaviour and energy literacy that's the main challenge. So rural electric agencies should continue doing great jobs, encouraging people to learn and understand how hard it is to produce electricity and how to use it safely.
Mm-hmm. So, Abe, just to remind our audience that if any of the questions have not been addressed, we've had quite a few that we have already addressed, but if there's any that were not addressed during this discussion, we can always pose those questions to you offline, so please do keep those questions coming through. And just to wrap up now, Abe, what are your parting words of wisdom to our audience in terms of the whole FinTech industry?
Well, it's moving very fast, so it's also very, very exciting. I think people are very frustrated by how we're still kind of being constrained as economies by perceived broken financial systems or slow-moving policies that are stifling innovation and entrepreneurialism. And this advent of FinTech is allowing really, really innovative projects to happen, both in financial sense and also in getting energy out there. So it's happening, it's exciting, it's happening faster than anyone could ever believe. And so if you're interested, get in contact with us. You can get involved with Sun Exchange and go solar at the click of a button.
So we are indeed living in very interesting times. Abe, thank you so much for sharing with us through the course of this live webinar. And just a reminder to our audience that a recorded version of today's webinar will be available to access on demand on our website. And please do join Abe and the ESI Africa team at the upcoming African Utility Week conference and exhibition 16th to the 17th of May in Cape Town at the CTICC. We really hope to see you there. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me.